FISU undergraduate conference. I would like to introduce Professor Julian, our keynote speaker. He is in the condensed matter experiment group at U of T. He's also currently teaching Physics 252, so I think many of you are fairly familiar with him. And he will also be our interim department chair over the summer. Just another fun fact. So everyone, please welcome Professor Stephen Julian.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me? Is the microphone working? Okay, great. So I was asked to give this talk. I'm not entirely sure what you want to know. So I have a bunch of slides prepared, but if I'm not telling you what you want to know, then just tell me. So I want this to be interactive. If there's something you want to know, just ask. If there's something you can contribute, then please do. If you've had experience of summer research, then tell me, especially if I make a point and you think it's right or wrong. I have no objection to people disagreeing with my viewpoint, because some things I say, I'm sure not everyone agrees with. So I hope this will be interactive, and we'll just stop when you guys get hungry. Okay, any questions to start with? Okay, so I want to start with something perhaps not entirely obvious, which is, should you actually do research as an undergraduate? And your primary task as an undergraduate, I think, is to learn physics. And I know that a lot of you hear some of your friends say, oh, I'm doing research with so-and-so, and they have 3 Nobel Prizes, and they've tasked me with winning their next one, and that's what I'm spending all my time on, and so on. But if you hear your classmates saying that, I don't think you should worry if you're not doing research. Especially in your first couple of years, the focus has really got to be on learning physics, so that when the time comes, if the time comes to do research, you'll be ready to do it. But I will say that even if you don't have, no problem. If you're not having research experience, there is a way of learning physics which is quite a lot like doing research, which is trying to figure things out for yourself and finding your own way of understanding things. And I have a nice quote for this from Max Born when he was a student. And he said, my cousin was a better student in math. So he's talking about his high school days, actually, in mathematics than I was. But he was astounded when I showed him an alternative proof for one of the theorems that they had been taught in their classes. And he said it would never have occurred to him to try to find out his own proof of something that we'd been taught in class. Okay, so this is something that I think distinguishes researchers from people who are not researchers, is wanting to figure things out for yourself. Feynman has this great, one of his excellent books on the pleasure of finding things out or figuring things out for yourself, or whatever it's called, but something like that. So I think this is really important, even in your courses, to take a kind of researcher's mindset to things and try to say to yourself, I'm going to figure out my own way of seeing this. I'm going to see if I can find other ways of looking at it. I think in the modern times, you have a big advantage, which is that you can all do computing, and you can do computer modeling of the stuff you're learning in class. So there are ways for you to investigate and think about what you're learning that is similar to the way researchers approach things. So this is not to say that you should not do research. So if you're thinking of doing a PhD, for example, which probably many of you are, then I think research is really important for 2 reasons. The first one is to find out if you like doing research. And I'm going to come back to this on my next slide, whether you like doing research, because it might seem amazing to you that somebody could not like doing research, but in fact, it's not that uncommon for people to not like doing research. And the second reason is you need letters of recommendation when you're applying for graduate school. So in your 4th year, your last year, around December, November, you have to get letters of recommendation to go with your graduate school applications. And the letters that are worth by far the most are people who have direct experience of you working in research, doing a project under their supervision. They can say all the relevant things that need to be said to the graduate school you're applying to about what you need to do. So it is important to get some experience of research. So if you're not planning to do a PhD, I think it might also be important, but I think the way you would approach it is a little bit different. So I'll talk about that as well. Any questions or comments? No, this is all okay. So a bit more about this to find out if you like doing research thing. So I guess I should say, how many of you have experience of doing research? So half, third, something like that. Okay, good. So it's very important to know that doing research is not like doing courses. There are some really big differences. So this might actually be a similarity. I thought of it afterwards. The whole thing of research is that you don't really know what you're doing. Okay? Because if people knew what they were doing, they wouldn't need to do research because it would already have been figured out. So there's always a big element of uncertainty in doing research. It's not only that you don't really know what you're doing, but you don't even know if the way you're approaching the problem is right. You might be on the wrong track. So there are people who can advise. You have a supervisor and you can go to them for help. But if they knew the answer, if they knew how to make whatever it is you're trying to make, or measure whatever it is you're trying to measure, or calculate whatever it is you're trying to calculate, they wouldn't need you to do the research. So they don't know either. They can make suggestions and their experience can be helpful. I think the biggest problem for a lot of people is that research usually involves working for a very long time without any feedback. So in courses, you have, irritatingly, I'm sure, but you have incessant feedback because you hand in problem sets every week and then you write tests all the time and you get the results back and you can really track how well you know how well you're doing. But in research, and especially the first time you do it, it can be very unnerving that you work for long periods of time, weeks, months, without any feedback. You don't know if what you're doing is going to work or not. So once you've been through this enough times, you know that magically at some point it will all come together. So when I was starting out, my supervisor said that the way research works is that you work for 6 months on a project without making any progress, and then in one day you suddenly make 6 months of progress. So that everything suddenly comes together. Another famous analogy is that doing research on a new project is like going into a darkened room that's full of furniture and the lights have been turned out. I think Primo Levi maybe came up with this the first time. And so what you're doing is you're stumbling around in the dark and you're trying to get a feeling for things, and you keep going, and then finally you find the light switch and turn it on, and suddenly it all comes together. So it's a wonderful feeling, this feeling that you get when the project really works and it all has come together. But especially when you're starting out and you don't quite believe in physics, you've been told all this stuff, but you don't really believe that it works. It can be very unnerving and difficult. And also in your courses, you're learning something amazing every day. It might not seem amazing, but it is. But in research, what you're learning is very different. It might be some tiny, trivial little detail about how to get one wire to stick to your sample, for example. In my group, we spend unbelievable amounts of time on things like that. So you don't really realize you're learning anything until you go to a conference and you give your talk and somebody else says, how did you get your wires on? And we've been trying to do that for 4 years. And then you end up with this 2-hour conversation about the technical details of this tiny little thing. And that's a really wonderful experience. But again, you're not learning, Nobel Prize level stuff every day the way you do in courses. And it can be really frustrating. So there are people who discover that they hate research. Okay, they might love physics or mathematics or whatever, but they hate research. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's just, it's a personal thing. When I was teaching in Cambridge, we had an undergraduate student. It was the most unbelievable undergraduate we've ever had. I've ever seen. He knew everything. He knew more than the professors. He aced every exam. You could put arbitrarily difficult questions on exams, and there would be one student in the class that would solve them. And when the time came to do research, he just could not do it. He just couldn't cope with all of these aspects of not knowing what he was doing, of not being able to look up the answer. So he was great at learning, but, and then I believe that he's a very successful hedge fund manager, and now he's having a very good life, but research was not for him. So when I said it's important to do research, it's important for you to find out if you actually can. Some people like this, all of this uncertainty and stumbling around in the dark, and some people don't. So you need to find out if it's for you or not. Got any questions or comments? The people who've done research, is this how you found it, or? That's right, yes. Yeah, when you're planning a research project, you think, okay, that should take about a week. And then it takes 6 months. And then once you've done it, you look back and you think, why didn't it take a week? I don't understand. Where did the time go? That's very true. Okay, so when should you do research? So I've taught first-year physics for many years here, as well as second-year physics. And I know that everyone comes in here very keen to do research, but it's difficult to get to do research in your first couple of years. And so I would say third year is the optimal time, not necessarily to start, but I think if you can start doing research in third year, that's about the right, that's fine. That's good, okay? So in the fall term, the winter term, or the summer after third year, I think that's kind of ideal. So one reason is it's a lot easier to get research experience in your third year. So we have research courses now that third year students can take. And if professors are hiring someone for a summer student, for a summer internship or something, they tend to look for the third year students. From the professor's point of view, once you're in third year in physics, you're pretty committed to physics. So a student might be really outstanding in first year, but there's always this nagging doubt that they might go off and do neurobiology or something like that. So we don't want to waste our valuable physics training experience on someone who's going to go and waste their time on something else. And you also have more experience from your undergraduate courses, from your lab courses, so you're more useful in the research by the time you've got to third year as well. So that's the time, I think, when it would be good to start. Starting in fourth year is okay, provided that you start in the fall if you're planning to do a PhD, because remember, you need to get that letter of recommendation by December. And if you're going to start in the fall of fourth year, you need to really get off to a flying start. You have 3 months to convince your professor that you're really great, so that they'll write a really good letter of recommendation for you. So you have to get off to a flying start. And earlier is fine. I know several of you have also had research experience, which is earlier, and it's not a bad thing. But for most people, it's difficult to get research experience earlier on. It's just the opportunities aren't there. So again, are there any comments or questions? So what kind of research positions are available? So to me, I would say there are two kinds. There's the one kind, is a paid position, which I would call we pay you to do research. These are the difficult ones to get. So there are various options: SURF, USRA, summer research employment opportunities. I had sorry about this. So on the Department of Physics website, do you all know about this? You do? Okay, so I don't need to dwell on this too much. So there's a nice web page that the undergraduate office has put together on research, mentorship, and career opportunities. So you can look at that, and looks different like that earlier. But there are supervised research courses, and then there are some things like the SURF program, which is limited, but some of you have done it, I know. Just a few positions a year. And then there are the USRAs, which is also a rather limited opportunity, but you can apply for US undergraduate summer research fellowships from NSERC. The applications, I think, are in January. Again, it's pretty competitive, but many people in our department get those. And it's not just our department that offers them. So you come from a different city in Canada, then you can also look at the local university there, and maybe they have positions. And then there are professors just hire people. If they have grant money, they will just hire summer undergraduates to work in their lab. So these are, a lot of people, this is how they get their start in research. They have the advantage that you get paid, so you get some money, which is important. But the most important thing right now is not, this is an unpopular opinion, but it's not necessarily how you're doing now, but how are you going to be doing 20 years from now, okay? What you're doing now is an investment in your future, I would say. So whether you get paid or not right now is not the most important thing, because by the time you get to my age, you'll have more money than you know what to do with. Why did I worry about money when I was young, you know? So, and the other thing is that these paid positions are somewhat less structured than the other kind of position that I'm about to talk about. So they may not be directed towards a particular goal, and you may not have your own project. You might be assisting somebody, and in the worst case, it might be that you're washing glassware all summer or doing something like that and not really doing much research at all. So that brings me to the second kind of research experience, which is a supervised course, or as I call it, you pay us. Because you have to pay tuition. These are actual courses, and you get credit for it. So the advantage of these courses is that they are well structured. At the start of the project, to get it approved, you have to say what you're going to do. These are the deliverables. This is what I'm going to work on. You have to have your own project. You may still be working with a graduate student, but you have your own sort of well-defined project. There are well-defined goals, benchmarks. There's a final report that you have to write, and there is a final oral examination. So you get these experiences of research, which are very important: how to write, how to give a talk, that you may not get if you're in one of these paid positions. So I strongly encourage you to follow this route. If you can't get a paid position, that's fine. Don't worry about it. All you have to do is talk a professor into supervising you in one of these supervised research courses. So I think they're great. I like supervising them, and I think that students get a lot out of doing them. So we have a new this year. There's a third-year research course. We've always had the fourth-year research course. You can do it as a half course, but it's better to do it as a full course because research takes months and months and months to make any progress, and doing it as a half course is a bit of a panic. Okay? All happy? Is this what the sort of thing you came here to find out about? Okay. Okay, so if you've decided you want to do research and you want to do a course, or you're looking for a paid position, how do you find a supervisor? This is what you really want to know, I suppose. So a lot of people spend a lot of time worrying about what research field to choose. I'm going to conclude at the bottom that it's not all that important. But I will say that what you do from day to day differs enormously between different research fields, and depending on whether you're doing experimental or you're doing theoretical research. So this might be something to consider. Do you like people? Can you get along with them? Do you want to work on your own? Do you want to work as part of a team? There is, of course, what kind of physics you're interested in, but that's not what this is about. This is what you do from day to day. So in some groups, you spend your whole time sitting in an office staring at a computer screen, running simulations or writing code or something like that. So you're sitting at a desk doing this. Some people like that kind of thing, and some people don't. In some research groups, you spend all your time looking through a microscope at tiny little samples and trying to get wires to stick to them. You might have a position where you're building electronics all the time, and some people love building electronics and some people don't. You might be working with pencil and paper, although that's pretty rare these days. So when you're considering a research field or a research group, I think it's an important question to ask somebody, what do you actually do every day? What does your day look like? Are you in the lab? Are you in your office? Are you at home? What are you doing? So secondly, a different point, if you really think you have your heart set on a particular field of physics, it's important, again, to find out what it's actually like to do it. If you want to be a radio astronomer, what's it like to, is a super cool field, but what's it actually like to do that from day to day? It may not involve that much radio astronomy. It might be a lot of building electronics or something like that. So, buck's not correct, is it? Yes, I have it here. Okay. So another thing to ask yourself is, if this is important to you, what are the chances that I will ultimately be able to make a contribution as a researcher in this field? I should preface this by saying what you do for summer research isn't at all locking you into a particular research field. But if you're looking at a research field, I think this is an important question. What are the chances of having a career and making a scientific contribution? And this is quite field dependent and person dependent. So a question you can ask is, what are the actual opportunities in this field? How many people work in this field? So my field of condensed matter physics is the largest field in sub-discipline in physics, because we pretend that we can do useful things and develop new electronics and so on. I would say at the other end of the spectrum, at the top of the hierarchy, is probably particle theory. Okay? There are very few jobs in particle theory. And I know we all started out, me too, we all started out thinking that's what we're going to do. But you may want to temper your expectations if you think that you want to have an actual career. If you just want to have fun for a summer, then you can do whatever you want. But if you're going to have a career, then this is something I think you should think about. You should also note that there are more experimentalists than theorists in the world. We do need theorists, and they do exist, so it is possible to become a theorist. It must be, because I know some of them, but it's difficult. So I did my undergraduate here. In my fourth year, I was at the top of my class. I think there was one other person who was near, but I didn't start out at the top. But I could never in a million years have succeeded as a particle theorist. Okay. It's just the way that they think and the mathematics that they use is beyond me. I cannot do it. Okay. And I was very fortunate. In my fourth year, one of my professors pulled me aside and said, "What are you going to do next year?" And I said, I thought I might do a PhD, and I was thinking of theoretical condensed matter physics. And he said, "Oh, don't do that." He said, "Oh, theory, it's awful." And the trouble with theorists is that they can never get an experimentalist to measure what they're calculating. And if you're an experimentalist, you get to do physics every day. If you're a theorist, you spend all your time on math and blah, blah, blah. So I was fortunate I had that conversation, because I did a PhD in experimental physics, and it worked out okay for me. So relevant to this point, what's the competition like? Okay. Particle theory, it tends to be, not always at all, but they tend to be the top students think, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go for it. Most of them end up in banking. Yeah, you have to sort of assess yourself and think, is this the sort of thing I can succeed in? Another question is progress happening in this field at this time? This is a rather dubious criterion, because fields can lie dormant for a long time and then suddenly come to life. The most unbelievable things suddenly become interesting. And literally, this has happened to me several times in my career, that I just can't believe that a certain way of calculating things is actually suddenly being used again after 30 years or something like that. And everything that's considered interesting now was considered boring at some time in the past. So if you think it's interesting, I would say go for it and don't pay too much attention to this. But on the other hand, there are some fields where just, there are leaps and strides being made right now, and it's an exciting time to be in those fields. And there are others that are maybe a bit more dormant. So in the end, at this stage, though, I don't think what you work on is as important as that you actually do something, that you get some research experience. So if you get an opportunity and you don't think you're going to get another one and it looks kind of boring, do it anyway. I think the important thing is the experience itself and making connections. Questions? Yes. Yeah. So you have, so the question is, you have graduated now? You have your bachelor's degree? And you want to do a research course in the department? I don't know. But I mean, I don't see why it should be difficult for you to do this, but I don't, you'd have to talk to the undergraduate office about if there are any constraints. I don't think you'd find it difficult to find a supervisor necessarily, but the practicalities of how you do it, I'm not totally sure, because I haven't heard of this before. Yeah. So the problem is always finding a supervisor. It is, yes. So on that website, there's a list of recently supervised courses in physics, and there you can find out the range of projects that are available and also who is giving them. There are certain people who give a lot of research experience, and so that's a place to start. Yeah. You want me to go to that website, or you can find it yourself? Yeah. Okay, so once you've chosen a research field, so how to find a supervisor. So I chose my PhD supervisor, who I'm also worked with for summer research, based on a completely idiotic criterion, which was how he thought about, seemed to me to think about physics. He was the smartest person I've ever met. And so I thought, stupidly, I thought, if I work with him, I will learn to think the way he does. This didn't work at all, in fact. But it didn't matter. Things still worked out. So if you can, it's helpful to talk to members of the group, the research group you're thinking about, to find out what they're like, someone is like to work for. Different supervisors have different research styles. Some of them are really hands-on, some of them are really hands-off. And students are also different. Some of them really like hands-on, some of them really don't like, they want to be left alone to get on with it. So, you know, I'm not saying one is better than the other, it's just one might be more suitable. One might suit you better than the other. If you know someone who's worked with a supervisor, that's a pretty good clue to whether they had a good experience or not, to find out. So talking to previous students, it's generally not possible, but if it is possible, you should do it. A somewhat relevant question is to find out if previous undergraduates have published papers as a result of the research. The answer is generally not. So most students don't get publications out of their research experience, but if they do, that's a good thing, because it really helps your CV, and it also helps you to see the whole process from starting the research to analyzing the data and writing it up. So it's a good thing if there are supervisors, but there are some people here, Maravusa, I think, is very good at this kind of thing, at finding projects that will actually produce a publishable result. So it's a good thing, but it's not completely essential. Or you can just choose blindly, as I said here. And the important thing to know in life, if you haven't already figured this out, is that you never, ever have enough information to make a truly informed decision about any of the major decisions in life. You know, you already know that sort of, because you had to decide that you're going to do physics in undergrad, and you probably had to convince your parents or somebody else that it was a good thing to do. And you know, you probably wondered, is this the right thing to do? And the answer is, well, once you've chosen it, you have to make it the right thing to do. You know, you have to make it the right decision. But with all the big decisions in life, you don't really know. But like with most of the big decisions in life, you're choosing between good things. It's not like one of them is going to be good and one of them is going to be a disaster. Most of the supervisors here will give you a great research experience, and things will work out, and you'll be fine because you're smart and you can do math and all of these things. Okay, so if you have someone that you want to work with, or even someone that you don't want to work with, but you're desperate, so how to approach them? So if you can, talking to them directly is a good thing to do. ambush them when they're not expecting it, because they're more likely to say yes if they don't have time to think about why they should say no. Okay? So you just go to their office hour and there's nobody there, and you say, oh, do you ever supervise undergraduate research courses? Or do you ever hire summer undergraduate students? Or do you hire people in your lab? I should say that volunteering is generally discouraged in our department. So most people, if they say, can I volunteer in your lab, the answer will be no, you can't. Yes?
I have a comment that you always want to go to the office hour the day after the midterm. That's when no one shows up. And that is like consistently true.
But it doesn't have to be the office hour. You can just show up in their office or something, whatever. Yeah. Or you say, I'm interested in doing a supervisor search course. If I send you an email with a copy of my CV and transcripts, would you be willing to look them over and talk to me? Okay, so you don't start with, are you willing to supervise me? You say, are you willing to talk to me about supervising me? I mean, it doesn't, ultimately the particular words you use aren't that important. But this is the sort of thing that you have to say, yes. Etiquette. Well, so the comment is it's mostly a matter of etiquette, but I'm not convinced that that's true. We're used to talking to students, and we're used to talking to all kinds of students, and so it doesn't put me off if somebody's a little bit rude. Yeah, okay, so I'll come to persistence. So a more common thing, because you don't know the professor, is to just send a cold email. And it's very important for you to learn how to do this, because you're going to do it a lot in your life, just emailing somebody you don't know. I would say the details of the email don't matter all of that much, but a typical example is, Dear Professor X, I'm currently pursuing a specialist degree in physics. I expect to graduate in June 2026, and I hope to do a PhD in physics. I'm currently looking for a supervisor for a Physics 370X course or whatever, or 470X, or for a paid summer research internship or whatever. So you have to tell them what you're looking for. I'm keen on getting experience in quantum optics, particle theory, whatever research group it is. I think it's important to say something like, I've looked at your website and I find your research on X very appealing. I think you have to be careful with this, though. Don't say, I've read your website and I find your research very interesting, because you could send the identical research. We know that you could send the identical research to email to every professor in the department. So you have to indicate that you actually have read the website. So say something that shows that you have read the website. If you have time, you could have a look through one of their papers. This led me to read your recent paper on why. That's not essential, but indicating that you have looked at the website, I think, is essential. I have an A+ average, or an A. You don't have to have an A+ average, A minus, B+. Average. I'm doing very well in my laboratory courses, as you'll see from my attached transcript. So you send the transcript as well, the unofficial transcript. And I have, if you have other relevant experience of research, you don't have to have, but you want to make the most of whatever experience you do have. So do you have time this week or next to talk to me? If there are no positions in your group, I'd appreciate any advice you can give me on finding a supervisor in your field of research. Okay, because often if you go and talk to a professor, they'll say, I'm sorry, I don't have any positions available right now, but I know Sergio de Libera is just setting up a new lab. He's going to be hiring a bunch of undergraduates. Why don't you go talk to him? Or something like that. So they will give you some idea of who they think can maybe give you a research opportunity. So remember that professors are used to getting emails from students. So it doesn't have to be a fancy email. Just tell them what you want and why. Remember that we like talking about physics. That's why we're professors. And we like talking about our work. So don't think of it as imposing on us. It's our job to do this kind of thing. So just don't be nervous. Just send the email. It frequently happens that people send these kinds of emails and they don't get a reply. So don't take it personally. It's not personal at all. Professors get a tremendous volume, an unbelievable volume of email. And if your email slipped off of their top 50 emails, the most recent 50 emails, unless they're super organized, they've just forgot. So you can send a reminder, I would say once. If they still don't reply, then they're not that interested. Yes? Yeah, a week maybe, something like that. Yeah. Usually they'll reply right away if they're going to reply at all. And they'll say, yeah, sure, drop by on Tuesday afternoon, 3 o'clock, are you free or whatever, send you some time for a chat. So you don't just limit yourself to one professor, write to a few of them. Or if you start early enough, you can sort of go through it sequentially. Okay, are there questions about this? No? So that was, you don't need to have an A+ average to get research experience. For the research courses, you have to have a B average. So, but there are lots of very successful physicists who didn't have A+ averages as undergraduates because, as I said at the start, research is different from courses. There are people who are really good at courses but not good at research. And then there's a smaller subset, but there's a subset who are good at research. I've met some unbelievable idiots who are fantastic at research, actually. So you can still succeed in research if you have the right. I'll come to what you have to do to succeed in research. I better speed up a bit. So in your letter, introductory letter, make the best of what you, if there is something you spend a lot of time on, if you like programming or electronics or something like that, then mention that make the most of what you have. Temper your expectations. If you have a B+ average, nobody is going to think of you as a potential particle theorist, so you don't write to the particle theorist looking for summer experience. If you're not planning to go to grad school, I think it's also fine, but then you should really think about what you are going to do and what you're interested in, and see if there's some kind of research experience that's available somewhere in the university. It might not be in our department, but it might be as well, that you can get. So if you're interested in transportation, if you're interested in green energy, if you're interested in heat engines, then yeah, you might be able to find a supervisor somewhere in the department or in the university that will supervise you to do that. So try to find a researcher whose work might get you started in this field, and they don't have to be in the physics department. Okay, I'm not so bad. So making the most of your research experience. So the first thing to know is that research is hard. Okay? By definition, all the easy stuff has been done. So research is hard. And you're competing with other smart people who are working long hours. So you have to work hard to succeed in research. Now, by succeed, I mean really turn into success. You can get through a research course and you can get a good mark and you can have a good time, and that's perfectly fine without working super long hours. But if you really want to succeed, it does take a lot of effort and time. So what does it take to succeed in research? How do these people who are unbelievable fools do well in research? So the one thing that you need above all to succeed in research is the ability to keep going when you don't know what you're doing. Okay? You just have to keep trying things. You have to keep working hard. You have to keep motivated, and you have to stick to it until you're done. And that's hard. It can be really hard to do that. So when you're entering a new research field, there's a temptation to try to learn it all because that's what you're used to doing, but I would recommend against that. Don't waste too much time on the literature. Your supervisor might give you a review article or something to read, and you should read that, but don't go chasing after every little detailed thing. Find out from your supervisor, what do you have to know, learn that, and then get going with research. Even if you don't know what you're doing, start in and do something. You should keep good records. People really do use lab books. They really do write stuff down. Because when you're finished your project, you want to be able to hand this over to your supervisor, and then the next person who carries on that project will know where to start. Don't be afraid to ask for help. One of the main themes of this is don't be afraid to look stupid. Okay? Don't be afraid to say, I don't understand that. You get an explanation. Don't be afraid to say, I still don't understand it. Just ask questions when you need help. think it's really helpful to talk about your work to people. If none of your colleagues will listen, bore some of your friends by telling them about your research. So I think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to write for your own purposes, even just to write about what you're doing, how it's going, what you think you might try next, what you've tried, what didn't work, what worked, and so on. I think, I mean, there's this term journaling that people use now. I don't know if you need to go that far, but I think it's helpful to write essays and things to yourself about what you're doing. And that's all I could think of to say. So if you have any questions, feel free. Yes. You want the microphone? That's the room microphone.
The first one is, sorry. It kind of reminds me of like some like these greatest writers, greatest inventors, something like that. I can remember like Dyson. Dyson failed like 5,000 times, like these prototypes. He has to reject 5,000 of his own prototypes, and even if he could get his 5,137 or so, nobody really wanted like his like Dyson vacuum at that time, and he has to resort to like making his own business. And fortunately, he became a billionaire. Like from all of these like being turned down, or like having to like turn down your like own stuff and then retry. It's a story of persistence, kind of like research. Does this like does this reminds you of how the actual process of research is like? And the second, yeah,
We can't all expect to be Dysons, or it's not always like that. It's still worthwhile, and it's still. Second point.
okay, I actually visited like the Xanadu like website, and the Xanadu's 8 values also actually resonated with me. And probably the most important one is impermanence. Impermanence. That means like everything is subject to change. Bad things don't last like forever. Like you have to move on from the bad stuff, the bad events. We're not afraid to fail. Did this resonate with like research? You want to
Yeah, walk around.
share the microphone?
Okay, I saw your hand, then your hand, and then I'll go to that side of the room after. Okay. Speak into whichever one you like.
Okay, so I know a lot of us are looking for like our very first research position, because a lot of us aren't necessarily in third or fourth year yet. And a lot of the time we have to submit like a CV or resume or something like that. Do you have any suggestions for those, especially when it's a situation where we might not have any prior research experience?
I can run back.